Hello and welcome back to Everyday Writers, your one-stop shop for demystifying the writing process. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal McQueen.
I'm your other host, Jordan S. Keller, and on today's bonus author interview, we'd like to welcome to the show Bobi Conn. Before we dive in, though, Crystal and I would love it if you gave that subscribe button a click and you gave the thumbs up a click as well. It really supports the show.
So Bobi Conn was born in Moorhead, Kentucky, and she was raised in a holler where she developed a deep connection with the land and her Appalachian roots, which hold prominent features in all of her novels. She has a master's degree in English and was my teacher. And her newest book, Someplace Like Home, was released last May. Welcome to the show, Bobi.
Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I went to college at Moorhead State University, so I spent a lot of time in Moorhead, and I understand the pull that environment has on people. It feels like a bit of old magic. Can you talk about Appalachia and how it influenced your writing?
Yeah, first, it's really cool to hear that you
Yeah.
spent some time in Moorhead, so you're well familiar with like Eagle Lake and
Yeah, we
uh,
hiked it every week at least. Or I wouldn't say hike. We took the walking trail at least once a week. And
yeah, same here as a teenager. I think Appalachia is just a really special place. I don't know exactly where that comes from. I kind of, when I look at old maps and see how it seems to be attached to Ireland and Scotland, like the same mountain ranges. Don't hold me to any
you're
geographical
like, there's the same
knowledge.
like soil levels and
Yeah, yeah,
salinities. And
yeah. It looks like they may have been joined at one time, but also, a lot of the like current population over the last couple of hundred years, came from the Irish and Scots Irish backgrounds, and then they also brought a lot of those traditions with them. So there was a lot of folk healing, there was a lot of the folklore associated with those cultures, and I believe that the place itself is special as well. You all may know this, but Eastern Kentucky has one of the only temperate rainforests in the United States,
yeah.
which
I
it
did
might be
not
the
know
only
that.
temperate.
Oh,
Yeah, that's something I learned just a few years ago, and I was like, that must be why the forest there always felt so unique, and there was something
yeah.
almost tropical about it. But anyway, so I just think Appalachia, physically and historically, and then also culturally, has this really unique combination of features, some of which may seem to contradict one another at times. But it's really there's a lot of beauty there, and I think that most of us from the region or who go to the region for very long fall in love with it sooner or later.
It's almost a guarantee. You're absolutely right.
So in your first novel, In the Shadows of the Valley, it's a memoir, while your other two novels are fiction. So can you first tell us like what led you from your shift from nonfiction to fiction? Cheryl Stray did something very similar where she went from fiction to nonfiction the other way. But just also, just talking about the beauty in the area that she fell in love with, that's so rooted into that novel. So can you just talk about, you know, basically your journey?
Oh yeah, definitely. So my first memoir, my first book, the memoir, it started out from a desire to tell a specific story as part of my graduate work at EKU, where I got to meet Crystal. So at that time, what I really wanted to explore was how to take real life stuff, even especially the unpleasant stuff, and make art out of it. I think that that's something that our great writers and other artists accomplish. And then there's something truly magical about it. I think of it as a kind of alchemy,
Mm.
not that it's so like otherworldly, it's deeply human, right? And I think it's really important for us to be able to do that. But it still feels magical when you manage to accomplish it or you encounter it in the world around you. So that was the goal with my memoir. And then when it came to my next book, A Woman in Time, I really I wanted to portray like that's based on a true story or some true
Oh,
characters from my family history. and some of their exploits. But I don't have those people around to kind of paint a historically accurate picture.
Oh,
So yeah, so I was like, well, this has to be fiction. And also that's really handy because I got to entwine some magical realism into it, which just happens to be
yeah.
my favorite genre.
Yeah.
So, I thought it was really great to use that book to explore themes around womanhood, Appalachia again, and then generational trauma as well as generational strength and wisdom and knowledge. So that was really the impetus for that book. And then the next one was based on my mother's life, Someplace Like Home. And it initially I thought that that might be biographical or, some sort of like creative memoir type of genre, if I could have, positioned it as such. But my mom's memories weren't vivid enough for us to be able to craft something that was just completely nonfiction. However, like I just grew up with so many stories. And she and I spent hours going through more of her stories that I didn't know. And what I decided to do with that is to try to position it more as like a coming of age story that would be more universal for women in her time and place, which was rural Kentucky,
Yeah.
coming up in the 70s and like dealing with a very particular, like a set of circumstances, but also um, like cultural and social changes and constraints that aren't so prevalent today. I think of that as more of like a story of an everyday woman who might not feel like her story is so flashy or worthwhile, but
Mhm.
I do think there's a lot of beauty in all of those.
I think that's like one of the biggest skills that nonfiction writers and creative nonfiction writers can do is take take everyday life. Like I hate to say like everybody has trauma, but everybody essentially has trauma. But
Mhm.
like some people take their trauma and make it work for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's ideally we get to, right? And we strive to. But, and then I hope, and one of my goals with all three of those books was, there is a lot of trauma because, and some painful experiences, because I felt like those were all important to represent.
Yeah.
'Cause historically, women were not, telling their stories. They weren't sharing, like my great grandmother, grandmother, even my mother, they weren't very empowered socially, or even within their families. So I felt like it was still valid to bring that to light while not hopefully making it like just like a pessimistic kind of thing where it's
Yeah.
like, let's beat you in the head with this more awfulness, right? Like we'll
No.
get exhausted by that. So, but it's an interesting puzzle to try to figure out how do you portray things realistically, the good and the bad, the
Hmm.
ugly and the beautiful,
Mhm.
while still making it feel like you've rendered it into art at the end.
Yeah.
Oof. Taking a step away from your writing, Bobby, what are some of the authors that inspired you? Because it feels like you've got a really good handle on your craft, and I didn't know, like, yeah, what authors kind of paved the way to inspire your writing and such?
Well, thank you for the compliment.
Yeah.
Um, so I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez as a teenager,
Hmm.
starting out with 100 Years of Solitude.
Oh.
And
It's a
then
heavy read.
yeah, but I was blown away by his style, blown away by that. That was probably my first foray into magical realism. Um, and then for the next 10 years or so, I just devoured every book of his I could find. And I really studied, well, he wrote a book, Living to Tell the Tale, and he talks about his writing style in that. So I
Oh.
learned a lot about like what makes it such an immersive world. Um, so he was a strong influence. And then I also read Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes,
Hmm.
like shortly
Oh,
after I wrote. the first draft of what became my memoir,
Hmm.
which it was like a graduate thesis, like a shorter piece of 25,000 words. Then I read, Angela's Ashes, and I was like, oh, so that's how it's done. That's how you can describe like poverty and angst and all this suffering and make people not want to leave the story you're telling. So I was like, well, if I can't do that, like that's what I need to do. That's the only thing I should strive to do. If I'm going to tell a sad story, you know, one with pain in it, it should have that much beauty. And then I would say lastly, Raymond Carver is a short story writer.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And yeah, I discovered his short stories right before I went to graduate school. I was trying to like self-teach a little bit because I went from philosophy undergrad to English graduate, and I was
Mm.
Oh, wow.
totally not well read in the English, all the canon literature. So I was like, what do I do? Anyway, I've somehow discovered Raymond Carver, and to see what he could do with it's such a short form,
Yeah.
and just like pull you in. And I feel like he just sort of he takes you on the journey, twists you around, shoves you out the door, and then you're changed and you're grateful for it. And so it's another kind of concept that I think about a lot when I'm writing. It's like, how do I make the reader want to be with me? And then how do I make them like maybe lose themselves a little bit in it? And then on the other side, you're going to go, well, wait a minute. I just felt this thing or experienced something that I didn't expect and I wasn't even looking for. And I didn't realize it was happening until it's over. So a kind of a lofty aspiration, but that's something I think about a lot.
Not that you write romance, but this feels like such a romantic approach to it, like finding that beauty in the gritty and keeping your reader connected even through like the sad and the trauma and like places they might not want to go and letting them be okay to be there. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. I hadn't thought about that as a romantic concept, but I think
Yeah.
you're right. And ironically, I tried to pitch a romance book for my
Oh,
next project, and like it went through multiple endless iterations of the proposal and synopsis and sample chapters, and then we landed on this isn't really going to be a romance. Well, maybe I'll get there, beach read someday, but
yeah.
it's a different kind of romantic right now for sure.
Very
Well,
cool.
one of the shows that Jordan and I did is basically incorporating romance into non-romance novels.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and it's not just like love between two people. It could be love
Mm,
between two friends, love between a parent and a child, love between, complete strangers, and just, showing the depth of connection between two people and how they connect, regardless of what the genre is. So anyway, maybe you can just incorporate romantic elements and have it be, like your B story or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's all like all well, I won't give it away unless we end up talking about it later. I won't
Once
derail
it's
us
out,
too
we'll love
much.
to have you back.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
so in your newest novel, Someplace Like Home, it's a companion novel to your memoir, In the Shadows of the Valley. And so can you talk about how, because you talked a little bit about your mom's story and stuff like that, but how you expanded it across three generations. And what kind of complexities do you find when you cross generations like that, writing from different perspectives?
I'm really glad you asked that question. That's a great question and gives me the chance to talk about like the structure and form so much, which a lot went into that. I mentioned that initially I thought this could be like biographical and maybe I'm writing it from her point of view. I didn't know how we would package it in the end. And then, very quickly I was like, okay, that's not going to work. Um, I also realized there was some complexity for me trying to tell some of the same stories from her perspective that
Yeah.
I'd written about in my memoir from my perspective as her child.
Oh.
Um, so what I ended up well, And then lastly, I realized too that like for me, I think, familial context and social context is really important to understand who somebody is and why they make the choices they make. And then some of my mother's choices I thought would be particularly too easy for people to misconstrue and misunderstand if they didn't have like a sympathetic view of her as a protagonist
Mm.
from the beginning.
Yep.
And so ultimately, the character that I wrote for her, Jenny, it's not a perfectly biographical representation of who my mom is, but what I wanted to do is like bring the reader into this world before Jenny even gets born. And
Oh.
so I was like,
Mhm.
let's have that be this third person omniscient narrator that's really like introducing us not just to her family, but to the community that she's born into and setting the stage for where are we socially, economically, culturally.
Yeah.
And then this child is born to parents who, just have like a a wild amount of history and nuances to understand. And then I chose a specific point in Jenny's life. I think she was 14 or 15 when we shift to her first person viewpoint. And that's the point at which my understanding could be, not a neuroscientist today or anything like that.
Yet.
Like maybe after I retire. But there's a point around that age where our brainwaves change and we stop experiencing the world like the sort of childhood, you're fully immersed, you're just in the I experience to being able to externalize and perceive the external world around you more. And so I thought that's a perfect age. And that's also an age at which we would expect a lot of people would be able to tell their own stories, even flawed, right? Like as an perhaps unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
But you're not going to have an 8-year-old telling you their life history and expect to get sequential, you know, kind of. So yeah, I took that approach. And then lastly, wrote the third part from Jenny's imagined daughter, who is a fictional version of myself, so that you get like some more sort of commentary on what happened. And that was in part so that readers who aren't familiar with my memoir would, still have like some sort of outcomes in this novel that I thought that would be satisfying. But one of the things that I discovered as I was doing all of this is, which it's common knowledge, like memory is incredibly unreliable. We
Right.
have a lot of different ideas about how things go down. And when I interviewed various family members, I discovered details about things that my mom doesn't remember, or they might have two very different conflicting ideas of what a parent did or didn't do. Um, and I wanted to try to capture all of that. And that was also part of the reason I wrote that third part in there was to say, like, you know, what she was born into, how she saw the world. And then lastly, you get to hear how do these other people experience what she experienced? How do they see her? And it's something that just fascinates me because we're all walking around like from our limited perspectives, and yet like everybody around us has a story about who we are, and what we've done or experienced.
Well, and even as a reader, hearing somebody else's perspective of happening, like what happened in the same scene, like you were talking about Jenny and then the fictional version of yourself, like reflecting on past things, like just being able to see that even two characters can have totally wildly different views. And even as the reader, we have to decide which ones we're going to believe. Like I think in
Yeah.
one of the classes we had in college, young Smith had us watch Rashomon, which was, three different perspectives. And then at the end, we all had to argue, like, what was the real one? Like, how do you pick out the truth out of each of those different perspectives of the same event happening? So I think, like it fascinates you, but I also think it fascinates like me. I think it fascinates readers. You're just trying to
Yeah.
decide. But isn't it funny how we always think that our own perspective is the right one?
Right.
Because how could we be wrong?
No, we're the hero of our own story.
Oh, yes, always the main character, right?
So, Bobby, you've kind of already touched on this a little, but with our podcast, Everyday Writers, we love to discuss how an author will go from idea to finished product. So, once you've kind of decided on who you're going to be writing about, where they're going to be at, how do you go from idea to finished?
This is where things get very not romantic for me. Um, because I've always worked full time and then, been raising children as well, my writing takes place like when everything else is taken care of. Um, so that means for me, I have to devote a specific amount of time, like hit word counts, track my progress via word counts, um, and just be really organized. So I am also very stubborn. So I've decided, whenever I've decided I'm going to write something, um, I've just forced myself to sit down and just start with whatever initial concept is in my mind. And, I will often have an image or like a character or a scene, some sort of interaction. There will be some little starting point, and then I'll just get that on the page. Um, and then oftentimes, like with A Woman in Time, I wrote several chapters, and then when I reread them, I was like, that's not the beginning of the story. Like, oh, I've got to go back, and then I've got to revise. And I revised someplace like Home. I revised the first section, the book one within the book. Oh gosh, 3 or 4 times. Like, I mean, complete revision. It was painful. Um, but yeah, I think you start with what you have. And whenever I find myself stuck, then I just say, okay, well, what's next? Let me just sort of like close my eyes and look at these characters and see what they're doing and what are they feeling. Or if I just have a scene in mind that I want them to get to, then I ask myself, how would they logically get there? You know,
Yeah.
do we want to go through like 18 days worth of storytelling? And probably, in some cases, no. So then I'll start out with like, oh, the season changed, or,
Oh, that's
you
smart.
know, somebody's something about a situation shifted, right, to kind of move the story forward and force me to think of what makes sense to come next.
Yeah. I think it's a real skill to be able to move through time, and decide
Mhm.
which pieces to do in scene and which pieces to kind of like, and then fall happened, you know?
Right. Yeah, I found that really difficult when starting with fiction. I was like, don't we want to hear it every single day? And
Yeah.
no, it'll be like a, 1,000 chapter book, and but we're not going to get there, not with this one. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it was again a puzzle. I like puzzles a lot, so I look at things like puzzles.
Yep. Definitely a puzzle person.
Oh, I hate puzzles. I think that's why I have to write like A to B, B to C, C to D.
There's definitely benefits to both approaches,
Yeah.
like the linear thinking or the, like we're just going to flitter around
Mhm.
and then maybe we have to go back and redo things.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, thank you so very much. That's all the time that we have for this bonus episode of Everyday Writers. Can you tell our listeners where they might find out more about you and your writing?
Yeah, so I have a website, bobbicon.com. My spelling of my name is pretty easy to find since there's not a lot of them out there. And you know, I've got various like little snippets on there that can go check out. And on Instagram, that's probably the easiest way to reach me via message. And hopefully I'll be out and about at some events in the near future.
Ooh, that'd be great. And listeners, if you love what you hear on Everyday Writers, click that subscribe button and give Crystal and I a follow over on Instagram.
And don't forget, every day is a good day to write. Thank you again, Bobby. It's so great to have you. See you
Yeah.
all next time.
Thank you all.